Hello and welcome to Not Another Top 10 List. A quick breakdown of how this video works is that we take the top 10 lists, we find out what's been on them, and we discount that from our own top 10 list, and we bring you Not Another Top 10 List. So, enjoy. So, the 5 lists that we pulled from today is Watch Mojo, Game Traders, TGN, Screw Attack, and Cadicrus. I think you pronounced that one. Screw that last one because it added a few things onto the list that the others had looked over, which discounted my looking. I've tried not to include games that are similar in the franchise to this one because I could have just gone Resident Evil 3 to keep it fresh. But here's the games that we are discounting from the list, so you will not see these games on the list. Interesting that I saw that the best game that was ever on the console was apparently Metal Gear Solid, which near enough every title had in its number 1 except one who had it as number 2. And what else do we see? Silent Hill, another great game. We have Final Fantasy 7, Resident Evil 2. For the Resident Evil vs Silent Hill fans, the list that had Resident Evil 2 in it, that didn't have Resident Evil 2 in it even, did have the original Resident Evil, which game meant that Capcom made all 5, and Silent Hill only made 4 of the lists, which I found interesting. So let's jump right into it, shall we? So starting off our list, we have Dodonpachi, a manic shooter developed by Cave. You collect power-ups, items, and all trying to get the top score. So a lot of these games that are out during the time, so what stuck out for this one more for me than the others, was that there was a 7th level. So if you can complete the 6 previous levels without losing a complete life and hitting certain scores, you got access to the 7th level. And for something back then to have hidden levels was special. And the other reason this stood out for me was it offered a good balance of challenge, because you could either play through the game just trying to complete it, or when you wanted to add those stress levels of learning the game and 100% completing the game, you had that extra level challenge there to offer you. The game is also very colourful as well, and in my opinion still stands up today. So there it is, kicking off our list, number 10, Dodonpachi, or Dodonpachi, however you pronounce it. So at number 9 on our list we hit Bloody Roar 2, a beat 'em up game. I know what everyone is saying, this doesn't compare to Street Fighter, but you're right, but Street Fighter's already been picked. But there's a reason why I love Bloody Roar, and that was it offers something different to all the mainstream titles that have come since. Something that was very common back then, and that was a two-tone fighting game where you would be a normal character who would build up a bar, and then you'd have an ultimate that you would change into. This one generally revolved around animals, beasts beating each other up. But the reason why I really enjoyed it was so visceral. The attacking and everything like that always felt like you were hitting really hard, and it felt so enjoyable to be able to pull moves off. The combos were good enough to provide you a challenge and things you had to learn, but weren't so complicated that you had needed a degree to be able to learn them. It's not the most complicated beat 'em up you'll ever play. It's just a pile of fun, and if you want a great feel when you're beating people up, Bloody Roar offers you that. Originally started as an arcade game and got ported over to the PlayStation. And for me, Bloody Roar 2 didn't offer much more than the first title, other than greater character selection, greater graphics. And so that's the reason why Bloody Roar 2 has been picked on my list. It's a great fun beat 'em up that tackles it from an angle that isn't so easily done, and does it well. Does it very, very well. Cooler World, a game that I'd never actually owned myself, but my next door neighbour did, and I spent many a time going over to his house and playing this game and enjoying it. It's not world-changing, it's not a fast-paced action game as the PlayStation was during that Pro era. This is very much a thinking man's game, where you control a beach ball and you have to move around these 3-dimensional puzzles using the very limited abilities ahead of you to collect all the items and to make it to the end. Again, I'll emphasise this is not going to change your world, but for a world that supports brain training, and that's popular as that has become, if you want to give your brain a nice little workout, with a game that has a nice little bit of character, the levels all look pretty, and it keeps you immersed from the start to the finish, I would advise Cooler World, for there is no cooler world than Cooler World. Next on our list might be a bit of a strange one for the EU residents, as I don't believe this had an EU release, but we have Tales of Destiny. With so many Final Fantasy games populating PlayStation's top list, I thought we would talk about a Japanese RPG that definitely has more of the feel of a Japanese RPG. This one really did stand out for me because of the story. You start off as a no one trying to find this break in the midst of a world that has discovered a new power. And like all new powers, the only reason it seemed to be created was to benefit those wealthy from you, creating huge flying castles, and you can explore this world in this RPG. The battle mechanics aren't going to show you anything new It's real-time based around decisions. Anyone who's played a Japanese RPG around this time would be very much used to this battle system. But the reason why I picked it was my love of the characters, including the talking sword. Yes, the game has a talking sword, as well as the world that was built around the game and the lore that goes with that. So for me, a very enjoyable JRPG, and one very much deserving to be on a top 10 list. So we give you Tales of Destiny. Oh, this had an American release, so if you do want an English version of it, there is an English version of it available to you. Next on our list, we have the first ever just number 2. As you'll notice from a lot of lists, the number 2s generally do come in gaming very much, because the first game sets a principle, and the second game refines that principle. So that's the reason why a lot of second games are considered better than first games. I generally prefer to put first games on here, because I think the idea is a lot more harder to come up with than the refining of the idea. But anyway, Tekken 2, Birth of the Stealth Assassins. Why have I picked number 2 over number 1? As it's very similar gameplay. You play as a ninja, stealthing around maps, trying to take out opponents. And that was the map editor in this game. It allowed you to create your, well, not your own levels, because it wasn't that fast, but you could create your own enemies, your own layouts, your own characters within the map, and there was even competitions based around this around the globe. The Tekken 2 game itself is a nice solid display, and if you want to play something that Assassin's Creed wanted to try and be, then I think Tekken 2 achieved that a lot better than what the Assassin's Creed series actually has. And also for early PlayStation, with a lot of the graphics being dark and taking place in night, it means that the graphics do hold up a lot better in this game than you do see in other games. So that's Tekken 2, Birth of the Stealth Assassin. So what happens when you've got a successful franchise like Mario Kart on one side, and a successful game like Tony Hawk's on the other? What you do is you mush them together and you come out with Cool Borders. A great game series. Not a great deal to talk to about this one, it was just pure fun. But which one to go for out of the series? I've generally gone for the third one, because it has the best character selection, the best map selection, the best board selection, which is what gives this game its variety. But the reason I really did like the Cool Borders series was because it gave you 2 games in one. The first set of the games is how quickly you can get down the mountains, very Mario Kart-esque this. You just got to get from the top to the bottom as quickly as possible, manipulating the map and the area around you to increase your speed. Second part of the game was point-based, and this was done on the same maps, but you went down them in a completely different way, because you'd have to learn the most amount of jumps and the most amount of objects within the game that gave you the points. And this, I remember this creating great thought for me of the decisions of, oh, if I do this jump I can do maybe a little few points, but then again if I skip that one I could probably get more pace on the next jump and hit that one bigger and actually do a 2 jump and get my combo on that one. And that thought and that desire to want to do more in this game is really what pushed it forward for me. And again, nothing world changing here, just a very fun game to play, and one of only maybe 2 sports games in this. But anyway, that's Cool Borders 3. At number 4 is a game that's probably higher up the list than it should be, purely because I thoroughly loved this game when I was younger. In fact, I got so obsessed by this, I learnt the trick that if you could reverse around the track after you bunged up the front of your car, you could actually reverse around the track, still earning points, but while using the back of your car rather than the front of your car. And for a game to have immersed that much that I bothered to do that, there must be something right to it. So how can I put this across to you? Destruction Derby 2 is a racing game that involves around crashing into cars in such a spectacular way that you damage them more than you damage yourself, and you collect points to go around the track. As your car gets more damaged, you find it harder to control, and that added level of complexity was something that was very good in the early PlayStation days. The graphics in this are a bit hit and miss, but then again, if you're most racing games, generally the cars look very good and everything else looks terrible, so maybe you could probably put up with that. But again, this game purely doesn't come down to technical amazement, it just comes down to a bit of enjoyment. How about if you could race a car where the main objective was to hit into other cars? And if that is the main objective you want, then give this game a go. You're not going to be offered a great variety as far as vehicles go or racetracks go, but there is enough to keep the game going. And if you want to play something that's slightly different from your general kart-based races or racing simulator games, then this is a very good one for you to go to. Offers a good challenge as you would need to implement basic race strategies to try and get around the track quick enough to keep up with the pack, but at the same time you also have to balance that in with the amount of destruction you're doing. But anyway, that is Destruction Derby 2. Next we come to a game that I was surprised not to see on any previous lists. This is the star of the infamous Lara Croft. Do I need to say anything more about this game? Which of the series I went for? I went for the original Tomb Raider because it was the game that remembered its roots. It was a platforming game, essentially. Looking at the game, you're never going to believe me that it was a platforming game, but this was a whole game based around a very simple principle. Do I do a single jump? Do I do a double jump? And that is what the game's main core was. You have puzzles in the game, but learning the difference between being able to do a single jump and a running jump was everything this game was. So what is not to love about the game? Well, the graphics have not dated well, and there has been a graphical remake of the game, if you'd rather give that a go. But what is there not to love in a game that offers great puzzles, great platforming, but also enemy selection as well? In this game, you will fight a T-Rex at one point, and at one point you will fight a kid on a skateboard. Yep, you heard that right. Lara doesn't only kill T-Rexes, she kills skateboarding children. The story of this game is pretty basic. You're hired to be a tomb raider, and midway through tomb raiding, you are screwed over by the people who have hired you, essentially. As all the good stories go, the people with money are always the evil ones. The one thing I really do remember from this game that really has stuck out, and I don't know why, and I can't put my finger on this, is Pierre. I remember as a child hating Pierre, and he doesn't really have that much of a story from what I can tell, but I got so in love with Lara Croft by the small little cutscenes that you do get through the game and the little bits of dialogue. She was pulled across so well as a female character for a game, in my opinion. A bit overly sexualised in the posters. A bit. But that didn't detract from the game, and still holds up to this day to be a very good puzzle platforming shoot 'em up. Yeah, that is a game genre I've just decided. There you go. Anyway, that's Tomb Raider. At number 2 in our title is a number 2 title. It is Driver 2. So the big difference here, the reason why I've gone for the second one, is the ability to be able to get out of the car. So let's compare Driver 2 to where GTA was at its time, and if you've played the overhead GTAs, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, then have a look into the early GTAs. But Driver 2 offered a 3D open world that you could drive around and explore. You could drive near enough every car on the map. You'd also have main missions as well as the side missions to complete. The game had extra depth with secret hidden cars that you could actually find if you either searched long enough, had access to the internet, which in those days was not everyone, or you subscribed to a game magazine, normally the unofficial ones, that told you how to do this stuff in these games. But for the added amount of depth for the time, Driver 2 far outpaces whatever was available at the time, and it's a shame that it's been associated with the Driver 3 gate since then, and the appallingness that this series came to an end. But Driver 2 does stand up still as a great individual game, and if you'd like to see basically what Grand Theft Auto copied to become Grand Theft Auto, and you can see a lot of its early roots in this game, then give this game a try. It's still thoroughly enjoyable and still thoroughly one to give a watch to. And anyway, that's Driver 2. So with everything that we've discounted and the list that I've worked through, for what for me was the number 1 PlayStation game, for me this is one that isn't talked about enough. It set the PlayStation off, and Sony, I think, offers most of its success to this. And the reason for that was because during the launch of these games consoles, the big selling point that Sony was pushing was game title availability. And this being a launch title of Sony's, and the thing that started them off selling their numbers as well as their unique marketing, Edge gave it an 8 out of 10, Maximum gave it a 5 out of 5. So what game am I talking about? So it was set in the year 2052, and players compete in the F3600 or F3600 Anti-Gravity Racing League. And the reason why this game really did stand out as a launch title for me was because it did demonstrate everything that the PlayStation was offering over its competitors. It was offering great graphics and fast processing speed. I mean, the game looked amazing for its time, and the speed in which you go and the way the game still stays as responsive is really what ties it down. And that demonstrating of pure graphical power believe it or not, was a major thing for the PlayStation. But when we compare that to launch titles that demo the capabilities of the console today, Wipeout itself was also actually a very, very enjoyable game. It was a racing game, which had been done very much before, but it was cranked up to 11 in the sheer fake sci-fi realm that it was depicted in. And for me, that mix of showing technically what a console can do at launch with actually mixing into a great game, the first type of its game that I can think of that offered this, because there was fast racing games before where you dodge targets, but the whole ethos of adding the tracks and the world around it added some additional to this game that showed off the graphics perfectly for the PlayStation, and the speed in which it's done, showing you the processing power, came together and launched Sony's platform off at a very fast rate from start. So, for future, when you're considering your top 10s and you're talking about the greatest PlayStation games ever, I hope that you give this one a consideration in your top 10 lists. But anyway, for me, for now, that is everything, and enjoy the world.